So, what we're going to look at in this lecture, and I hope it's not going to be too long, but I want to look at Leanne Simpson and Alistair MacLeod's pieces. Because Leanne Simpson's is her piece Brown Against Blue, and to me sometimes it feels like short fiction, other times it feels like poetry. I almost feel like it's more determined by my mood. So I probably will just call it a piece of material. And obviously I don't mean cloth, I mean a piece of writing material. So the objectives are, I want to look at, of course, the story, things that we have talked about, such as narrative arcs, in this case, the narrator's arc, symbols, and I'll talk about the author biography, and then I'm going to shift over to Alistair MacLeod's work. So I'm going to talk about the story, and of course, because this is a creative writing class, I'm also going to discuss what Simpson is doing in her writing. So the story is like just quite basically a character study built around a hunting trip between a narrator and a man that appears to be her partner. One of the first kind of unusual things that she does is the way she uses the second person pronoun, you, and it's quite unusual. So her you isn't addressing an imagined reader or another character or a former lover, but the you, as we discover towards the end of the story, is referring to and addressing a moose. And this makes the story quite charged, because this is quite a unusual way of using that second person pronoun. So let's consider the way Simpson tells us a new season is fast approaching. She writes, "The first snow came last night, reflecting skylight back at us from the ground up and bringing respite. We're losing fast and we all know it. The Eagles left last week." So that's her just talking about a change of season. And watch as she slips from this talking about the seasons changing towards a description of the narrator. There is a denseness to the color of the lake that matches the dead blue sky and the deficiency of certain neurotransmitters in my head. So here, where the narrator is telling us that there is a mental disorder or perhaps clinical depression, or but she tells us in a really different way, the dead blue sky and the deficiency of certain neurotransmitters in my head. So the narrator tells the reader, she moves on then, the narrator, to tell us of her love affair with sad, always using a capital S, as if sad is not a chemical imbalance or a state of mind, but as if sad is a living being moving around and through the narrator. She writes, "I cheat on myself with sad, and she never abandons me. In a way that will sound awful to you, but not to me. She is the only one that loves me in the way I need to be loved. My constant lover sad, as muted, dysmorphic, entrapment." So one of this kind of love we find out shortly that is so precious to the narrator with sad is sad's just consistency. So right away we hear, "She never abandons me." And I'm sure you know this, dysmorphic, as I'm sure you're aware, is characterized by malformation, as in dysmorphic cells or dysmorphic ears. So the narrator describes a method of comfort that she indicates is from, and I'm quoting, therapy lady. She tells us that if her partner pulls away from her first from an embrace, she will feel abandoned. Thus, she doesn't ask him to hold her. She also talks about sad holding her hand, which also keeps her from opening up her chest just a bit to let love in. And at this point, she's even kind of talking about an imagined love, like this kind of perfect love that is imaginary. So even her relationship with sad even stops her from even imagining kind of a perfect love. The narrator then talks about the moose, and this is at the point when we as readers realize that the youth she's been addressing is a moose. Her partner hears the shot cast, and he brings three things: fragility, wild eyes, fear. Her partner returns to her as she's kneeling by the moose. This time, the three things he brings are tobacco, a knife, and some proud. Obviously, the knife is for dealing with the carcass of the moose. The tobacco is a gift. And what I really like is how she uses that word proud. So really consider her diction and word choice. Simpson is choosing her words so carefully. So if we think about it, the definition of pride, which is a noun, refers to the feeling of being satisfied with something that you've gained. Proud is an adjective that is the feeling of pride. So she is in essence saying that he brings her the feeling of satisfaction of having gained something. So this short piece is really dense, loaded with so much information. And also it is, of course, fragmentary. How much she leaves for her readers to piece together and to weave together is quite impressive. So the narrative arc in this piece of material is really, I'm saying a soft thread because it's so like see-through or diaphanous or just really gentle. So one of that points where we see a narrative arc is where Simpson writes, but this is something I want to do, and he is someone I want to do it with, and I don't want to waste it. And here I am wasting it, on the verge of wrecking it, actually. So her narrative or her plot is not heavy-handed. So the narrator's arc, we see a movement from indoors to out of doors, not stated, hardly even implied, rather it just occurs. It just happens. And this is mirrored in the internal world of their narrator and their external world. So we just move between internal, external, in, out. And of course, I've discussed the U. Symbols, of course, notice the colors from the title that recur throughout this piece, brown against blue. One of the ways I really appreciate the transformation of this is at the end when the brown eyes of the moose and the brown eyes of the narrator's partner converge, and it actually becomes difficult to separate the two. Simpson writes, the sun is making the water, his brown eyes sparkle. Blood red light comes out of his chest and into mine, like I knew it would. He presses his body into mine, and there are tears in his eyes, and I'm so effing naive. Of course he saw it all along. He kisses, and he doesn't stop. There are, of course, other symbols. Water is another symbol that appears. She really considers water in different ways. She thinks of water as she and her partner canoe over it, as an affirmation that together movement exceeds individual effort. Yet she follows this later, transforms this symbol of water as being a manufactured struggle. So perhaps here in this repeating and transforming symbol, we can interpret the character's understanding that dealing with her depression alone is much more challenging. So there's a lot of layered nuances within this short piece. So notice that the author, and this is Simpson, I've given you images throughout this. Notice that she places the Anishinaabe or the Ojibwe language into her story. So I have some relatives that are Ojibwe. Some of these I know, some I had to look up. I know that Chimigwet is a heartfelt and layered thank you, often translated as big thank you. I am not sure how to pronounce this. I don't know if it's Guy or Key, but refers to getting away from or fleeing. This other word I really struggled with. I believe that the first portion of it means to give, and then I think the second portion is a stem, but I don't know what that stem is. So I know there's something about giving to something or someone, but I don't know what that stem is. And then the other word, it means life. So I'm just ending on a biography of Simpson. Of course, you can just pause this and read it yourself. She has a really wonderful website. And I'm so sorry, my son is so noisy. She has a really lovely website, and she's also, as you can read here, a scholar, a musician, just a really prolific artist. Anyway, so please check out her other work if you're so inclined. I would certainly recommend it. She's just an absolutely wonderful writer. The next short, and this is a short story, so different than Simpson's, and separating it by decades. So The Boat was published in 1968 as opposed to Brown Against Blue, which I believe was published in, I think 2019. So Alistair MacLeod's Boat is a lot earlier than obviously Simpson's. And the objectives, of course, are I'm going to look at author biography, the story, and what the writer is doing it, narrative, character, and symbols. So Alistair MacLeod was born in 1936. He passed away in 2014, a Canadian novelist, short story writer, and an academic. He was a professor for many years. He was born in Saskatchewan, but raised in Cape Breton, died in Windsor, Ontario. Very, very well-known Canadian writer, winner of many major national and international awards. This piece is quite autobiographical, even though it is labeled as fiction. So The Boat is something most of us, I think, have come to expect of a short fiction or fiction in general. It's giving us a somewhat linear story. This story opens in the present tense, and MacLeod writes, "There are times even now when I awake at 4 o'clock in the morning with the terrible fear that I have overslept, when I imagine that my father is waiting for me." When the narrator is right around 15, his father falls ill and the father is unable to work on the boat. MacLeod writes, "By March, we were very far behind, and although I began to work very hard in the evenings, I knew it was not hard enough, and that there were but 8 weeks left before the opening of the season on May 1st. And I knew that my mother worried, and that my uncle was uneasy, and that all of our very lives depended on the boat, being ready with her gear and 2 men, by the date of May the 1st. And I knew then that David Copperfield and The Tempest and all those friends I had dearly come to love must really go forever. So I bade them all goodbye." So I'll get into this in a bit. Obviously, the writing is so different. Simpson is very, very fond of embracing grammatical errors. She uses sentence fragments and is very, very attached to a run-on sentence. So right away we're looking at MacLeod, who's writing in a very standardized English, following grammatical rules. Just one moment. So, there's so many differences with the two of them. And also, we're really hearing about the coming of age. In many ways, the boat is a Bildungsroman from the past, where by that I mean the narrator is looking back and telling us of the time he came of age, when he became, in essence, a man, when he moved and shifted away from being a child and, learned the difficulties inherent in the world and living in it. So in the story, the narrator's father asks him to return to high school, to go back and embrace David Copperfield and the Tempest and all those friends he so dearly loved. And because of the way his father asks him, the narrator does it. And MacLeod writes, as I left, my mother followed me to the porch and said, I never thought a son of mine would choose useless books over the parents that gave him life. The narrator indicates, and I wished that the two things I loved so dearly did not exclude each other in a manner that was so blunt and too clear. So in the story of the boat, the narrator is at the center of a storm between his mother and his father, each desiring a very specific and different life for him, one from the other. The father wants his son to leave Cape Breton, go to university, and become possibly a professor, which he does. The mother wants her son to choose Cape Breton, fishing, the village, and stay there, which he does not. So, but there's a travel, there's a journey to the decision for the narrator to become a professor or choose university and education. Books, basically, over the boat. The narrator thinks he's choosing his father when he indicates. So I told him, and by him he means his father, so I told him one night very resolutely and very powerfully that I would remain with him as long as he lived, and we would fish the sea together. And he made no protest, but only smiled through the cigarette smoke that wreathed his bed and replied, I hope you will remember what you've said. MacLeod writes, and I stood at the tiller now on these homeward lunges, stood in the place and in the manner of my uncle, turning to look at my father and to shout over the roar of the engine and the slop of the sea to where he stood in the stern, drenched and dripping with the snow and the salt and the spray, and his bushy eyebrows caked in ice. But on November 21st, when it seemed we might be making the final run of the season, I turned, and he was not there, and I knew even in that instant that he would never be again. So, and notice here in the following paragraph, there is a shift from past tense to present, as MacLeod writes. On November 21st, the waves of the great Atlantic are very, very high, and the waters are very cold, and there are no signposts on the surface of the sea. You cannot tell where you have been 5 minutes before, and in the squaws of snow you cannot see. And it takes longer than you would believe to check a boat that has been running before a gale and turn her ever so carefully in a wide and stupid circle, with timbers creaking and straining back into the face of the storm. And you know it is useless, and that your voice does not carry the length of the boat, and that even if you knew the original spot The relentless waves would carry such a burden, perhaps a mile or so by the time you could return. And you know also the final irony that your father, like your uncles and all the men that form your past, cannot swim a stroke. So I think what is really beautiful about the story, other than just everything, the writing, the symbols, the beautiful, incredible sentence structure, paragraph structure, is this terrible choice that the narrator must make, that and is unsatisfying, is in some ways really torturous. So the story unfolds as the telling of basically the narrator's life to some extent. Um, he's torn between his parents' desires for him. His mother, of course, wants him to remain in Cape Breton. His father wants him to, leave Cape Breton, get an education, and live a different kind of life. These two conflicting desires, in essence, destroy the narrator, and he remains in many ways rooted to the past. Dreaming, he is still fishing with his father. And he is quite trapped within the moment of his father's dying. And we see that because it is in present tense. He has never been able to place his father's suicide in the past. So we see the character arc most clearly in the narrator, though it's foreshadowed somewhat with all his sisters, because even though the sisters are really undefined, they kind of are just rather grouped together as kind of one sister standing in for many. The sisters do what the narrator eventually does. The sisters leave Cape Breton and live different lives. So he's clearly seen in juxtaposition. His mother, for example, is described as, "My mother was of the sea, as were all of her people, and their horizons were the very literal ones she scanned with her dark and fearless eyes." So the narrator's character arc is one that is forced. He must choose a way of life that will disappoint one of his parents. And when he chooses his mother's way of life, thinking he's doing something for his father, his father commits suicide, altering the narrator's path and severing him from a relationship with his mother. So at the moment of his father's death, the narrator becomes essentially an orphan. He loses his mother in the same moment. So symbols. The second paragraph of the story opens with the narrator, living in a university town, being a professor, and dreaming that he has overslept to get to the boat. At such times, only the gray corpses on the overflowing ashtray beside my bed bear witness to the extinction of the latest spark, and silently await the crushing out of the most recent of their fellows. The gray corpses are representing crushed cigarettes, but they're also foreshadowing the death of the narrator's father. And of course, the boat. MacLeod writes, "I first became conscious of the boat in the same way and at almost the same time that I became aware of the people it supported." And then also consider how he describes his father's bedroom. "Still, the room remained like a solid rock of opposition in the sparkling waters of a clear, deep harbor, opening off the kitchen where we really lived all our lives, with its door always open and its contents visible to all." So MacLeod, without a doubt, breaks many of the rules involved in showing rather than telling. He tells a lot, but he doesn't reveal information. He allows the reader to make discoveries and decisions towards the character. For example, he writes, "And it is not an easy thing to know that your mother looks upon the sea with love and on you with bitterness, because the one has been so constant and the other so untrue." So he may be telling us something about his mother and how she feels about him, but he's doing it in a very metaphorical, symbolic way. And he doesn't necessarily tell you how to feel about his mother. He's merely relaying how he feels, she feels about him. So I hope that you're doing well, obviously. I hope that you are all well. Thank you very much. I hope that you have enjoyed these pieces of material. I love them very much, obviously. The Boat is one of my favorite short fiction pieces. I think it is structured almost perfectly. In any event, thanks very much, and remember, office hours Wednesday. You can meet me there anywhere between 11 and 1, and of course I'm happy to meet you outside of office hours. If those don't work for you, just email me. All right, bye.